What was the most inappropriate time you couldn't control your laughter? My family tried moving my elderly grandparents into a nursing home. It was basically an experiment to see if they liked it and could deal with living in a new place. Well, my grandfather, who has lived in the same house since birth, was very angry about this move. The minute they arrived at the nursing home, he started acting out, dropping his pants in the hallway, sticking his tongue out at everyone, and being generally disagreeable. Myself and 2 other family members decided to join them for the first dinner at the new place. Walking over from their room to the dining room went smoothly, but once we got to the doors of the dining room, my grandfather stopped, clicked his heels together, stood at attention, and then promptly stuck up his arm and yelled "Heil Hitler." Then he goose-stepped his way to his table. It was horrible, but I could not stop laughing. To this day, it makes me laugh just thinking about it. I would like your grandparents. I was in a seminar where a distinguished physiologist was talking about his research. He started talking about measuring enzyme activities, specifically the enzyme cytochrome C oxidase, which is shortened to COX. He was summarizing a slide and said, "And that was for those of you who are into COX." I burst out laughing. I was the only one. People stared. I still couldn't stop laughing. I went so red from trying to hold it in. So awkward. Everybody else was laughing on the inside. They just pretended to act all mature and fancy. I'm in nursing school. In my last class, we had to watch a video about people who had their children pass away, or had stillbirths. It was quite a sad video. Someone in the video was talking about their child's funeral, and mentioned that saying anything is better than saying nothing at all to the parents who had lost their children. She mentioned that someone told her, "Congratulations on accident." I don't know why, but I lost it. Burst out laughing and couldn't stop for a good 5 minutes. All eyes were on me. I felt horrible, but if you were watching it, you'd probably laugh, too. A few years ago, I went with my best friend to her grandpa's funeral. He was a veteran, so there were a lot of other veterans there as well. Everyone was sitting inside the church. The priest was doing the funeral mass. I was sitting next to my best friend. She was crying. On the other side of her was one of the veterans. He started coughing and accidentally let out a fart. The fart seemed to shock him and he exclaimed, "Oof." I couldn't help but laugh as silently as possible, which wasn't really that silent. I felt so bad but still couldn't stop. I looked over to my friend to see if she was pissed at me, but realized that she was laughing too. That made me feel better. If I looked over and saw my friend laughing too, I would laugh harder and just make it worse. There was a boy in band class who tried to get out of doing something, I can't remember what it was, by saying his sister just got diagnosed with cancer. I just started busting up. I knew he was lying because he didn't have a sister, but everyone believed him and I got the nastiest looks from all 60 people in the room, which made me laugh even more. Worth it. Farted so loud during a rally it echoed throughout the entire gym. This was during the 8th grade. We were doing some kind of fundraiser for this kid that got hit on his bike a week before. The vice principal was talking about what exactly was wrong with him when I felt one a brewing. So I leaned into my buddy Eric next to me and said, "Hey, I got a secret to tell you." I let it rip and comes out much louder than I expected. Was sitting Indian style on the gym floor. The sound echoed out through the entire gym while everyone was dead silent. Even the VP went silent. While Eric and I were laughing our asses off, we get pulled out of the rally by my history teacher asking why we thought it would be funny to disrupt our VP like that. Through my laughter, I tried to explain I didn't know it was going to be that loud but ended up that way. Ended up getting 3 days detention for that crap, but it was well worth it. In psychology class my teacher was talking about probability for some reason and kept saying the chance of getting head. Each time he said it I burst out in laughter to the point where my teacher got quite pissed and had a rant about our immaturity. Getting head is almost as funny as getting tail. When the pregnant lady whose groceries I was bagging had her water break mid credit card swipe. Beep sploosh giggle. Unemployment 2K12 no regrets. Several years ago I was at a funeral with my brothers. A fairly distant family member that we didn't know that well had died. We had been there for ages, and we got really bored. So we tried to tell each other the shittiest jokes possible to pass time, but not laugh too much. My older brother came up with knock knock who's there lettuce who lettuce in. For some reason, maybe the completely deadpan way he said it, me and my younger brother started laughing, and I just couldn't stop. So there I was, in the middle of a crowd of people waiting for my family member to be buried, just laughing hysterically. I was at a super fancy violin recital, all dressed up in heels and pearls. There was a dramatic pause in the music and I couldn't help thinking, good God, if someone dropped butter right now, it would echo up to the rafters. I learned that day that there's only so long you can disguise helpless laughter as coughing before old ladies in fur coats shame you out of a concert hall with just their eyes. In intermediate, 7th 8th grade school, we had a media program where we'd do a morning broadcast every day. We'd rotate between producers, camera techs, and broadcast anchors. This was the day my friend and I were both anchors. Beforehand, we were joking around about poi, it's a Hawaiian dish made of mashed up taro, and we calm down before we start the broadcast. As soon as I start saying my lines, he whispers to me, poi, and I burst out laughing. I go on for a few seconds and I try to compose myself, and he tries to take over for me, but then he starts laughing too. Remember that this is live in front of the entire school. This goes on for a little over a full minute of us trying to start our lines but just laughing. We didn't get into any trouble for it, because our teacher loved us and said it happens. I'm late to the party but I'll still comment. 2 years ago my best friend died of an enlarged heart. It just happened. Nothing could have been done to prevent or treat it. I was pretty devastated by the whole event and had to play a major role in his funeral, giving the eulogy. After the service and at the gravesite, the priest came up to say the final blessings. Now, my friend was a pretty serious atheist who married a Japanese woman. His conservative white parents were never fans of the union, so they made it a very abrupt point of the service to give a casket cross to her and say, and I quote, "Yuka, please accept this cross as a symbol of our faith, and Derek's faith. Hopefully, one day you can accept Jesus into your heart." Now, I knew this bulls was coming so I rolled my eyes and dealt with it. However, after that, the priest said please remain silent while they raised Derek into his grave. He was places in a wall as opposed to buried. At that point a freaking forklift, came and doing its backup beep sound. I lost it. I absolutely lost it. I just started busting up laughing. Here I am, 26 and burying the closest person I know, and a forklift is just jerking the casket around. I am laughing so hard that my mother, who gets the absurdity of the situation, starts laughing. Scowls are in abundance and people actually have told me I was so rude for it, but frick em. Derek was my best friend and I know if it was me in that casket and that forklift beeped and jerked, he would have laughed too, and for that I'll love him, always. I was in 8th grade chapel. A guest lady was speaking about something biblical and I wasn't really listening but suddenly she said, "And the dong crows." I put dong in caps because she emphasized that word and even did a little pause and sorta looked around after it. Being the 8th grader that I was, I burst out laughing and couldn't contain my laughter in the middle of chapel. No shame. A funeral for a 2-year-old baby girl. They had a terrible freaking folk singer play a song. She couldn't play the guitar in time with her voice and she had this funny, high-pitched, warbling voice. I have no freaking clue who she was or who thought it would be a good idea for her to be there, but I couldn't help laughing. If I hadn't known any better, I would have been looking for hidden TV cameras. It was that bad a performance. I just kind of put my face in my hands, pretended I was crying. I walked outside to cool down. I felt terrible, but even now I roll my eyes at that singer. Freaking up a kid's funeral is just the worst. You'd think people would at least try to keep it as serious and classy as possible, but I just can't believe some of the crap they pull around that sort of thing. At a funeral where there were bagpipes playing, when the players started packing the bagpipes into the back of a small car while the funeral was still proceeding, the squashed bagpipes made the most peculiar honking cries. It was very difficult for me to maintain my composure. As I have a brother who is a piper, I can confirm this noise is one of the most difficult to keep a straight face to. My 7th grade history teacher had the whole class stand close together with our eyes closed in one corner of the room to simulate being on a slave ship. We were told to imagine how it would have felt, being chained together in a dark tight space. I couldn't help but imagine if one of the slaves farted and, being chained together, nobody could get away from it. I started to quietly chuckle, and my teacher yells, "It's not funny," in a super offended tone. I think I got away with it since all our eyes were closed, and if anyone looked to see who it was, I put on my best poker face and acted like it wasn't me who was laughing. You should have let one rip right then and there. My best friend at the time took me to her childhood friend's house so she could introduce us and I guess become friends. The afternoon was going just fine. We were goofing off and making stupid jokes all day, and then his dad came home from work. I asked him where his mom was and what she did for work. He looked at me and said in the same goofy tone, "She's dead." I totally thought he was kidding and laughed my face off. When my friend told me he wasn't kidding, I just laughed harder because I felt awkward. The laughter went on for a good 5 minutes and the entire time I kept apologizing. Laughs, I am so sorry. Laughter continues. I was in my algebra II class last year. The teacher had just passed out their homework, so it was pretty much silent in the room. Suddenly, this girl behind me sneezed and then immediately farted. Think, ahhh cho'oth. I looked over at my friend who was busy suppressing his laughter and I just lost it. For the next 10 minutes, my body was shaking from trying not to laugh, which just made it worse. I seriously just laughed at your typing out of the sound. A guy with one arm came into work, and a co-worker walked up to him and asked, "Hi, do you need a hand?" Then they both kind of just looked at each other while I turned away and walked elsewhere in the store to hide. If there is anyone reading this who only has one hand, if anyone ever does this to you, please grab their hand while saying yes, this one will do. Job interview. I was nervous and had 2 coffees and spent the morning watching cat videos on YouTube. I didn't get the job. One of my best friends was sitting front and center at our college theater production audience of about 300, tripping her face off on acid. She has a very distinct, and some would say shrill, piercing, annoying laugh. The play began, and she began to laugh at each line in the show as if it was the most hilarious punchline you've ever heard. Every line. It was so ridiculous that the other people in the audience thought it was part of the show and that it was some new theater technique. So they all started laughing every time she laughed. The actors got really messed up and I could see the confusion on their faces. Then the audience got it after about 15 minutes of this laughing getting funnier and funnier, and then followed the most awkward silence tension I've ever witnessed in my life. The kind of awkwardness where being a fly is being about 2000x too big. Yep, and it wasn't even me. Haha, that's funny. I remember some amazing times with my friend where we were tripping and just could not stop laughing to save our lives. Laughter just flows so freely at the smallest thing. Good times. My friend asked me to go to Christmas Mass one year. I'm not a believer but went along as a favor. The local Catholic church is huge, but by the time we got there it was standing room only, so we stood at the back. After a while we noticed there was a little boy in the back pew who kept staring at me. I'd been ignoring him for about half an hour when, just as the priest said, "Let us pray," and everything got real quiet. My friend turns to me and says, "He thinks you're his dad." I lost my crap completely. I spent the rest of the service desperately trying to maintain some kind of composure and be respectful, but that little bastard just kept turning around. I imagine everyone who saw me standing there, shaking, red-faced, with tears streaming, must have thought I was having a really profound religious experience. Your friend is a genius humorist. I laughed way too long at this. I have a tendency to burst out laughing when someone dies unexpectedly or by some creative means in movies. What? There's a heavy dramatic scene and the female walks out into the street. POW, the bus macks her in front of the horrified male's face. Cue the dramatic music and me laughing like a hyena in the background. That one part in Taken, you guys know what I'm talking about. I absolutely lost it. At the funeral of a girl who shot herself in the chest, they're playing a video of pictures with sad music, and I grab a Bible and set it in my lap. On the cover it said Bible, Special Edition. My best friend leans over and whispers that the Bible I have is better than a normal one because of the director's commentary from God and Moses. I was laughing so hard my eyes teared up and I covered my face. Afterwards everyone was trying to console me because they thought I was sobbing with grief. Everybody consoling me would just make me laugh that much harder. I was at my girlfriend's brother's wedding when I was 15. The best man was my girlfriend's other brother. He is always a joker and is one of those guys who has me in tears every time I see him. He starts a speech about how he always looked up to his brother, the groom, and then pretended to cry. I was right in front of the top table, and I laughed loudly for a couple of seconds. Turns out he is actually crying, and I am on the wedding video laughing at him while he is crying sentimentally. Luckily he sees the funny side. Classic schmosby. When my best friend arrived at school looking incredibly sad and teary and telling me a family member had died, she was so quiet and really held back on telling me who it was. I was freaking out asking if her grandparents, cousins etc were okay when she suddenly blurted out that her old, senile, grumpy butt cat had died. The laugh escaped before I even knew it was there. I guess I was just so relieved that it wasn't an actual person who died, if that makes sense. Disclaimer: I do in fact love animals. I just was not particularly fond of this bastard cat that continually left his crap in random rooms of her house for us to find. 2 stories, one about me, one about my dad. 1. I was at a wedding just a couple of months ago. At the reception, I sat at a table with a bunch of good friends. The bride's dad started to say grace before the meal started, and half the table just freaking lost it for no reason. Everybody was definitely staring at us. 2. My dad is a chemist, and thus goes to many conferences all around the world. A little over 10 years ago, he had to go to a conference in Austria, and decided to bring my mom and I along for a few days. While he was going to conference sessions, my mom and I were exploring the small village that was hosting the conference. We met up with my dad for lunch after one of the sessions, and he was chuckling to himself. We asked what happened, and he explained. He had been in a session about electrodes. The presenter was a Japanese man, who kept pronouncing it erectodes. My dad couldn't contain himself and just started laughing his butt off in a room filled with distinguished chemists and Nobel laureates. He eventually had to excuse himself from the session because he couldn't stop laughing. Erectron sounds like a villain in a really bad parody of Transformers. In an all-freshman class in high school, the somewhat special kid rips one. Everyone in the class is holding back their laughter, the teacher, even, and she says for everyone to just let it out, and oh god, I have never laughed harder in my life. Needless to say, none of us have grown up a bit. I used to laugh when I was nervous. I went to court with my mom and couldn't contain my laughter. She lost her case. Oops. The last time I went to Sunday Mass, I was zoning out balancing my checkbook and all I heard of the scripture reading was something like, "And Jesus rode into Jerusalem upon his butt." Couldn't help it, busted out laughing. That's when I realized I just wasn't into my religion anymore. I got this hilarious mental picture of Jesus riding a floating butt. It was a couple hours after my mom died. My sister's guidance counselor drove her home from school, and she runs to me and my dad and we have a big glomping 3-way hug. My sister said, through her tears, "At least she'll never be cold again." My mother was chronically cold due to neurological disease. She died in a fire. My dad and I laughed in spite of crying. I'm really sorry about your mom, but boy am I glad your family was able to smile though it all. Kudos to your family for being that strong. I was pretty young, maybe 11, was at a cousin's house who was a year or 2 younger. Said cousin had another friend over named Roger. We were all playing Halo, laughing, joking, etc. After one particularly funny joke I make, Roger's laughing came to a complete halt. We asked what had happened. He looked up at us, and in the most ashamed voice I've ever heard he said, "I wet my pants." At this point, I take a second to let this wash over me. Just 1 second. And then I laughed harder than I have ever laughed at anything in my entire life. I couldn't stop until maybe 30 seconds later. Only now, years later, do I feel bad about it. Wash over me. My grandmother's funeral. They had a little 80-year-old woman get up and sing my grandmother's favorite hymn. But when she opened her mouth she had the voice of a male tenor opera singer. My sister and I were dying. So brutal. Him. At a funeral, My grandma's funeral. I was in the middle of giving a speech eulogy. I didn't think anything was funny. I don't know. It was a weird reaction. For whatever reason I could totally envision that. I'm sure everyone at the funeral understood. I'm the kinda guy who laughs at a funeral. My grandma's funeral. Before I start, you need to know that I am German. I saw a family tree a long time ago, but I didn't learn English until later. So I sat there in the church listening to the priest preaching when he suddenly said, "We say goodbye to our beloved mother, grandmother, sister, and wife and Kochnaibich." The literal translation of the German version of "nay" would be born as, he said my grandmother was born as a bitch in front of my grieving family. I just sat there, trying to hold back the laughter, saying to myself, act like you're crying. TL. Doctor, I am 1/4 B. When my parents yell at me, half the time it's because I am in disbelief of whatever stupid thing they are mad about. Half the time because I would do whatever I did again in a heartbeat. Luckily, they're pretty cool most of the time, though sometimes. My dad once yelled at me for some stupid reason when I was 20 at the airport, calling me by my full name. The thing is, I don't have a middle name, so he said damn it between my first and last name. I laughed right in his face, but we were in public so he couldn't do crap about it and just stood there all red in the face. No regrets. I watched a guy turn a corner and run face first into a stop sign. It clanged loudly. A short while later we came to the same corner and I pretended to run into the sign and everyone busted up except the original victim who was returning to the area and saw the whole thing. I was on the trampoline. A friend was used to being on the trampoline and could do flips, backflips, all while being bounced. You know where you land right before the other person lands and it adds an extra strong rebound bouncing them higher. Well, I accidentally bounced him when he wasn't expecting it and he landed on the back of his neck. I'm laughing now. It scared and I guess hurt him and he got up and started running in circles holding his neck screaming my neck my neck. Now I'm taking breaks typing this BC. I'm laughing so hard, except when you run in a circle on a trampoline you kind of bound, which made it hilarious to me. Such a dong move, but he obviously was fine. I am sorry but that's the funniest thing I've ever read. So me and a friend were really high, and like most high people we went to get Chinese food. Things were going pretty well until a pair of girls sat down at a table next to us. The thing was, one of the girls had no legs. I saw this and was really freaked out. I leaned over to my friend enjoying his orange chicken and whispered, "Dude, don't freak out, but this chick has no legs." He looks over at her, and he freaks out and yells "oh crap" at the top of his voice. We both start laughing and cannot stop. Every single person in the place was staring at us. We cannot stop laughing. The wait staff had stopped what they were doing. We just couldn't shut up. So we dropped a $50 and left. TL. Doctor saw girls with no legs while high, laughed at her. Dachau concentration camp in the crematorium. A joke had come to me and I started laughing and my friend looks at me with this look of this is not the time nor the place to laugh, so I whispered to her, "Is it hot in here or is it just me?" Spoiler. And she instantly erupted into laughter and we had to leave. Had a similar experience at the Holocaust Museum in DC. My brother had been cracking jokes all day, but it was the video about a survivor with a really strange name that did me in. Uncontrollable laughter. It was very awkward. In the cancer center, then again I was getting chemotherapy and I was cracking as many cancer jokes as possible. Inglorious Basterds. Opening night. I'm with my buddy Dustin. Our theater is filled with people that have apparently never seen a Tarantino flick because very few people are laughing at all of the absurdity in that movie. So it's at the scene where the Bedu emerges out of the dark tunnel with a bat. We're already kind of giggling because Brad Pitt is being a goofball about this Nazi captain's impending death. As soon as Eli Roth starts caving in the Nazi's skull with his bat, me and Dustin are literally screaming with laughter. We're the only two laughing in a theater of 300 plus. The only two. So freaking awkward. We laughed hysterically again during the Hugo Stiglitz montage and at the scene where the two Italians shoot Hitler in the face approximately 4,000 times. I don't think it was inappropriate to laugh, but the fact that everyone in our theater had a stick up their butt made it feel inappropriate. If you aren't laughing during a Tarantino death scene, you are doing it wrong. I was cracking up that entire movie. I was living in Texas and a group of friends came to visit and go to the Texas Free Thought Convention. This was the last convention Christopher Hitchens spoke at before he passed away. During the brief Q&A period there was a moment where the room was quiet and some let out a fart. I'm sure everyone heard it and we all kind of chuckled, but my buddy sitting next to me tried to stifle his laughter. This only made him laugh harder. Not only was he unable to control his laughter, but all of us around him couldn't help but start to laugh. So for about 4 minutes I was sitting next to him trying not to laugh and to listen to Hitchens while he tried to hold everything in. His face was turning cherry red and I kept trying to pinch him to get him to shut up. It eventually subsided, but we got several WTF looks for a while after that. I had gone to meet the family of a college girlfriend for the first time for Thanksgiving. This was soon after Katrina, and my girlfriend's aunt and uncle had taken in a black guy named Herb who had been displaced by the flooding. So we're all sitting around the living room after dinner, playing this game called Mafia. Basically, someone in the group is a secret mafioso who chooses someone to kill off every round, and people try to guess who the bad guy is. Anyway, as part of the game, the round's narrator gets to describe how the victim was killed. Girlfriend's 10-year-old cousin starts off. Tragically, Herb was killed last night. He was hanged. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and immediately knew what the other was thinking. Lynching. We broke out laughing and couldn't stop. It was so funny precisely because the kid had no idea what he just said, and Herb just had this kind of morose expression on his face. You could tell he knew exactly why we were laughing, and somehow, having the rest of the adults glaring at us made it even funnier. Working on an assignment in class at high school, listening to the Ricky Gervais Show podcast on my iPod. I was totally tuned out of my surroundings, so I didn't notice that the class had gone dead quiet after a girl received a devastating phone call and had just put her head down and begun sobbing. I burst out laughing at the podcast, and glance up to realize everyone is trying to murder me with their stares. To make matters worse, I was stoned as stinking spider monkey during all this. Ended up alright though. Her father had to go into a risky operation and survived, and everyone did realize it was an honest mistake on my end. It's okay, the Ricky Gervais Show is dang funny. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.